All right. Welcome to Leading the Charge. I'm your host, Brandis Banos. And today we're going to be going over anti-Semitism laws, the breakdown of American culture, and the loss of trust in our institutions. Before I get into any of that, I think it's important because this is my first official show, my first official video. This is a show. This is going to be a show. Because this is my first one ever, I think it's important that I give you guys some context on who I am, what I believe, and what the overall goal of this channel is going to be so that you guys can hold me accountable moving forward. You know what my values are, you know where I stand, and if I start to stray from those values, you guys will be able to hold me accountable because I've been transparent in what I believe. I've been transparent in how I feel about certain things. You guys know my ideology. You know where I stand on culture, cultural issues. And I think it's important that I give you guys that context because without that, I'm just going to be some guy who comes up here and rambles for an hour or an hour and a half, and it's going to be incoherent. There's not going to be any message. There's not going to be any big takeaways, any big ideas that I relay. It's just going to be me coming up here and rambling about the news. And you guys aren't really going to be able to connect with me because you're not going to know what I believe in. You're not going to know where I stand. I'm just going to be some guy who comes up here and talks about breaking news, talks about current events, and has absolutely no deeper moral or ideological connection to the material. And that's inexcusable. That's a poor way of doing politics, in my opinion. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and give you guys an idea on what I believe. So first off, I'm a college student. I'm in my 20s. I'm young. I don't want to be too specific because this is going on the internet. This is going on YouTube. And I'd rather keep some of those, more personal details private. But yes, I am a college student. A couple credits away from graduating. I'll be done within the next 6 months to a year at the latest. And, I've been interested in politics for a long time. I've always loved it. I've always been passionate about it. But it wasn't until more recently that I started to have I guess you could say, political awakening. That's a fair term to use to describe the reason why I'm interested in politics now. And I have to give credit. I feel like it's only fair if I give credit on who inspired me. Because it's not fair for me to come up here and start riffing, and being inspired from them and taking some of their ideas and then not giving them any credit. That's not cool. So, for starters, I'm inspired heavily, actually, by guys like Nick Fuentes. And I know that might sound ironic, considering the fact that I'm black and he's a white nationalist. Well, I'm black and Hispanic and Native American and a lot of other things, but I would say I mostly would classify myself as a black person, a black man. And he's a white nationalist and he kicks sand on black people whenever the opportunity presents itself. And obviously it's like, I don't think that kind of rhetoric is particularly constructive, especially given the political atmosphere that we're in now, where the country can't seem to find consensus on anything. Americans can't find consensus on anything either. I mean, race relations have gotten significantly worse according to all measures, all metrics, all polling data from 2002 till now. Race relations have gotten way worse, especially in the past 5 or so years. So when you got guys like Nick Fuentes adding fuel to the fire, pouring gasoline on it, it's kind of like, I really don't think that this is the direction that we should be heading in. But besides that, and besides, I disagree with him on some other fundamental things like race realism. I am very skeptical about race realism. I'm very skeptical of whether or not race is really something that's rooted in biology. Like, obviously there's some genetic and allele frequencies, patterns, genotypical expressions that you tend to see amongst certain populations versus others, but to be able to neatly group an entire population of people, multiple different populations of people who have very different genetics and have very different histories and have in some capacities been separated into different regions of the same continent, to classify all those people as white, I don't know if that's something that I can do. I don't know if that's something that there's any real consensus on. I've looked at the evidence, I've looked at the data, I've looked at the genes, and there just isn't enough credible evidence to say that you can classify all these people on the basis of genetics. Because what people are looking at when they're talking about race is really phenotypical differences, right? Like darker skin, eye color, hair texture, nose structure, craniofacial features. That is what people are usually looking at when categorizing people by race. But they conveniently ignore the 20,000 or 22,000 or however many other genes that exist in the genotype that lead to so many different variations that might not get expressed as visibly in the phenotype. Like, it's possible for somebody from Africa to have more genetic similarities to someone from Western Europe than it is for someone from Southern Europe to have with someone from Western Europe. It's possible, like I said, and let me repeat myself to be very clear, it's possible from someone from like West Africa to have more genetic overlap with someone from Western Europe than it is from someone from Southern Europe to have genetic overlap with someone from Western Europe. And if race was so rigid and so fixed, that wouldn't be possible. Because Southern European people who are classified as white, if there was so much uniformity between their genetics and someone from Western Europe, it would be impossible from someone from Western Africa to have more genetic similarity to someone from Western Europe than someone from Southern Europe. And this just plays into the vast differences in genetics that make it very difficult to classify people as a particular race. Now, obviously, that's rare. That doesn't happen frequently. And there's strong overlap in allele frequency and genotypical expression and what alleles people carry at certain single nucleotide polymorphisms that happen to overlap heavily in certain populations that don't overlap in other populations. But nonetheless, that notwithstanding, there's still so much genetic variety between people within populations and a lot of genetic similarity between people from other populations and those populations that would make it very difficult to just classify race as a solely genetic factor. It is a largely social and phenotypical factor. But that's a completely separate conversation, okay? That's not relevant, all right? Sorry I went on a diatribe. The point I'm making here is that I am inspired by Nicholas J. Fuentes because there's one thing that everybody can agree on, and it's the fact that he is a patriot. He is 100% a patriot. Don't care what anybody has to say. He cares about this country. He says the truth. He speaks his mind. He doesn't run advertisements. He doesn't run from debates. He stands on his ideology, and he hasn't changed from his positions for several years. He is 100% ideologically consistent. He's not a flip-flopper. He's not one of these people who's going to be like, I left the left, I'm going to the right, like Dave Rubin, like Anna Kasparian. Okay? He stands on his principles through and through. Same with Destiny, who I'm also kind of inspired by. He's a hardcore liberal in his actions as well, if you know anything about the guy. And even though I disagree with him on so many things, I respect the fact that he's principled, that he sticks to his beliefs. Same with Nick. I have a lot of respect for people like that. Because it's easy to get on YouTube, get a couple subscribers, get a little bit of clout, get a following, and then sell out. Once you get a little bit of attention, once you get some force behind you, support, it's very easy for some billionaire or some millionaire or someone who's well connected to come into your realm, to send you a message, to contact you through some third party and give you an offer to sell out and push their talking points. And the people who don't do that, the people who stand in opposition to that, and Alex Jones as well, he's a part of this because he says the truth. I don't agree with everything he says. He's got a lot of, conspiracies that, I don't fully buy into, but I respect people who stand by their principles. That is a very respectable thing, because at least with those people, you can trust what they say. You can trust what they say. You can trust what they believe. They're not just taking money from someone else to push talking points and push an agenda. Now, that aside, I've told you guys who I'm inspired by. Let me get into my own beliefs. I am a hardcore nationalist, like a hardcore nationalist. I'm not a globalist. I believe this country should be 100% invested in the well-being of its own citizens before anybody else. I care about the well-being of small business owners. I care about the well-being of the ordinary American. I care about the well-being of men and women in this country and children as well. And that means the people who are going through the public education system, who are working part-time jobs, who graduate from college, who are trying to have a decent life, who don't have a whole lot of options, who aren't well connected to like some DC nexus of people who have ties to the White House and ties to Fortune 500s and ties to the financial industry, and they all kind of feed off of each other and, have secret meetings and get each other into prestigious universities and help each other with fellowships and introduce each other's children to powerful people. Those aren't the people who I care about. Those people will always be fine. The aristocrats, the socialites, those people are always going to have stability. And if things do get bad, they're like the people on the Titanic who have first dibs on the lifeboat. They know that the ship is going down before anybody else on the bottom deck knows. And those people can skedaddle and save themselves while the rest of us sink. So I don't really care about those people. Those people are not my people, unfortunately. I care about ordinary Americans. I am a hardcore nationalist. I believe we should secure the borders. I believe we should get rid of illegal immigrants in this country. Okay? I believe we need to be a sovereign country. We should run our own country. We should run our own affairs. We should not put other countries before ours. I believe we need to have Christian values. I believe we need to have a culture that has customs, traditions, that unites the entire country. A founding mythology that we can all agree about. That we need to put our American identity before any other identity that we might have. That is incredibly important to me for the social fabric. Regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of religion, our national identity is something that should be incredibly important to all of us. Because if it's not, we're going to become very tribal. And when you get tribal, people get divided. People get hurt. A lot of people die. A lot of discrimination starts to happen. And with the population that we have here, with the amount of people that we have here from different backgrounds, if the bottom falls out, we're going to have a Rwanda genocide part 2. Where the Hutus go into villages with machetes and kill all the women and kill all the children and light the villages on fire and take the cows, And with all the guns we have here too, I'm just saying, But, that's a separate issue altogether. Anyways, So those are my beliefs. I'm a hardcore nationalist. I believe in traditional Christian values. I do believe that this country should have a Christian foundation. That's what it was started with. That's what it was founded on. Protestant, Anglo-Saxon values. That is what this country was built upon. And all of us need to do our part and adopt those values to strengthen this country. Okay? So that's where I stand. I'm a hardcore nationalist. I think we should build a cross by the White House. No, I'm not joking when I say that. We should build a cross by the White House or by the Pentagon, just to remind everybody the country that they're living in, to remind everybody what our values are, to unite the country around a common philosophy. Okay? And I am an individualist, by the way, but we do have to have collectivist attitudes as well if this country is going to last. Because the way it's going right now, things are getting pretty out of hand. We don't have consensus on anything. We don't have unity on anything. It's a huge problem in this country. And I guess this kind of dovetails nicely into the broader conversation I want to have today. So, Noam Chomsky, whom I have a lot of respect for, even though I don't agree with all of his politics, Noam Chomsky came up with a term called manufactured consent. And for those of you who aren't aware, manufactured consent is basically the foundation by which media operates. They want to manufacture consent amongst the broader public to push a particular narrative or an agenda. And this comes at the expense, at the cost of counter narratives, of counter agendas, of anything that could subvert the government's official agenda. Okay? So you need to understand that going in when you're looking at any kind of political media, especially mainstream media. And for several decades, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, all the mainstream, what we call legacy media now, platforms, have basically just been mouthpieces for the Republican and the Democratic Party, because those are the people who fund them. Those are the people who they fund. Those are the people they have parties with. Those are the people who they work with. Those are the people who help their children get into prestigious universities and get them cushy jobs. So it's all interconnected. The politicians, they know the people in the media. They know the people who work at the Pentagon. They know the people who work at the State Department. They know the people who work on Capitol Hill. They know the people who run the Ivy League institutions. They all know each other. They're all friends. They all hang out. This is not a surprise. This is not a conspiracy. The people in the agencies, the FBI, the CIA, the DOJ, all these people hang out. All these people know each other, okay? And so what they do is they come together, they feed information to each other, they collaborate, they text each other, they have group chats, and they push popular narratives to the media. And so you'll notice it's rare that CNN, unless it's something flagrant, will ever say anything bad about Biden. At least that's the way it was until Trump got voted in. And the same thing happened with Trump, or when any Republican politician gets into the White House. They don't say anything bad about them. They don't smear them. Fox News is not going to do that. And so you have to understand how the media works, how manufactured consent works. Now, here's the thing. All of this started to change about 5 or 6 years ago during the pandemic. Everything changed. Everything. Independent media skyrocketed. Podcast ratings went way up, went through the roof. Everybody started watching podcasts. Joe Rogan's numbers went through the roof. People started looking at alternative media platforms to get their news because they realized they couldn't trust the mainstream media. They couldn't trust the institutions. For obvious reasons. People lying about COVID. People hiding stuff. People downplaying the destruction and the chaos caused by the Black Lives Matter protests. And the list goes on. Woke ideology. People acting as if women can be men, men can be women. People hiding and sweeping under the rug anything that had to do with Joe Biden's cognitive decline. This was happening for years. For years. The Iraq War is another example. For several years, all the mainstream media platforms were talking about how we were bringing liberty and democracy and peace and restoring balance to the Middle East, and we were the heroes. And meanwhile, guys like Dick Cheney were making millions of dollars because the company that he had a stock option in, Halliburton, was giving fraudulent, abusive contracts to steal oil from the government of Iraq. Auditors in the Iraqi ministry were being killed for trying to expose fraudulent American contracts and fraudulent BP, which is British Petroleum contracts, literally being shot right in front of their house. You have the fact that guys like Joseph Schmitz, who was the Inspector General at the Department of Defense, literally swept under the rug any corruption that he was asked to investigate as far as defense contracting was concerned in Iraq. And of course, as soon as he resigned, he became the chief operating officer at Blackwater, the company that he was asked to audit. So this is all the corruption. This is all the lies that have been uncovered. The JFK files, the Epstein files, and all of our politicians hanging out with Epstein and knowing Epstein. The blackmail, the 9/11 stuff. Guys like Kurt Weldon are coming out now and talking about how 9/11 was obviously an inside job. There was 2 terrorists who were on the CIA payroll. You had the entire FBI come out and buy the first 10,000 copies of Colonel Anthony Schaefer's Operation Darkheart because they didn't want it to reach the public discourse. And they had him go back and redact all the stuff that was in the initial copy of the book. You had NIST employees coming out saying that the way the buildings fell was literally completely synonymous with what you would see in a controlled demolition. NIST members, or the fact that firefighters weren't able to testify in court about everything that happened. You had aviation experts coming out and saying that the way they were able to fly the planes directly into the Pentagon with the level of experience that they had, which was little to none, the probabilities of that happening, and even them trying to simulate that using software and technology and computers and stuff like that, trying to simulate that, recreate that through a simulation, the likelihood of that happening in the way it did, hitting the building at the trajectory in which it hit it, was literally less than 1%. There's all kinds of things that have come out, or the fact that the steel was completely melted, which is impossible when you consider the fact that office fires do not get hot enough to melt steel. You would need explosives combined with office fires to reach a temperature high enough to melt steel. You have the fact that there was Israelis who were dancing on top of a van in a parking lot in New York City, cheering as they were watching the World Trade Centers collapse. And then they were brought in by the local police department. And it turned out these guys worked for Mossad. And then when they went back home and they were asked by the Israeli media why they were doing that. They said it was because they were happy that the United States finally got a chance to realize what Israel had been dealing with Hamas and the Palestinians for so many years. You have the fact that in those vans, there was explosives being stored in them. And the fact that the CEO of the company, Urban Movers, the guys who owned the van, fled back to Israel the moment all the other people who were with him got brought in for questioning. I find that a bit suspicious. And all this is declassified, by the way. You can go look up all this for yourself. I'm not just pulling your chicken. This is all out there. So trust in institutions now is at an all-time low. And the government seems to find a way to continue to make it worse and worse and worse. Because now we have all these anti-Semitism laws coming out that are completely shutting down free speech. You have people being doxxed, blacklisted, on canary mission. You have people being expelled, people being suspended, people being arrested, detained, deported for criticizing a foreign government. Even people who weren't participating in sit-ins, people who weren't participating in protests, being deported, being arrested, being detained, potentially having their green cards and their visas revoked. And this is all being done under the auspices that it is harming the United States' ability to conduct foreign policy. This is the State Department saying this. This is Marco Rubio saying this, straight from the horse's mouth. You have the fact that Jewish billionaires in New York City are creating group chats with the chief of the NYPD and people from the media and other politicians and other billionaires creating a group chat to pay the mayor of New York City to crack down on anti-Semitism at universities like Columbia and NYU. So our government is being controlled. Our government is being occupied. And it seems rather obvious to me that this is terrible for the future of our country. If we can't conduct our own foreign policy, if we can't operate in a way in which we do what's best for the will of the American people, as opposed to doing what's best for people who are incredibly rich and willing to pay us and pay our politicians to exercise their will, which is not in our best interest, I feel like there's a conversation that needs to be had there. And it seems a bit weird to me that the people who attempt to have that conversation get censored. They get kicked off of platforms. They're called mentally ill. They're treated as a threat to society, to the government. They're put on watch lists. They have their bank accounts frozen. Their names are slandered. Their reputations are tarnished. They can't get jobs. They can't make money. They can't participate in society as normal people. This is not good for our country at all. And so here's the point I'm trying to make. Let's just address the elephant in the room. For the past 30 or 40 years, the United States has been occupied by Israel. Let's just call a spade a spade. You can go all the way back to the 1960s if you don't believe what I'm saying. We've been occupied by people who are evangelicals, who are Zionists, who are Jewish, who have done anything, have exercised any means, have pulled any strings that they could possibly get their hands on to push the United States foreign policy in a way that would benefit the state of Israel, even at the expense of the American people, even at the expense of the will of American patriots and American people. Go all the way back to the 1960s. John F. Kennedy was trying to strike a balance with Egypt, with other countries in the Middle East, and with Israel. He was trying to pressure multiple countries to sign an NPT, a non-proliferation treaty. Because the moment one country in a particular region gets a nuclear bomb, every other surrounding country who wants hegemony in that region wants a nuclear bomb. That is just obvious. That is just how nations operate. When one country who poses a threat to another country who happen to share borders or exists in the same region, when one of those countries gets a nuclear bomb, it only makes sense that the country that they're conflicting with would also try to get a nuclear bomb, or that the country they're conflicting with would get a nuclear bomb. This just seems obvious. And so for years, John F. Kennedy was trying to send scientists, was pounding the table, was sending stern letters to David Ben-Gurion and Levi Eshkol, who was the successor to David Ben-Gurion, demanding that they allow inspectors from the U.S. government to go to Dimona and to go to other nuclear sites in Israel to inspect their facilities to see if they were enriching, to see if they were proliferating. And what did the state of Israel do? They dragged their feet. They imposed heavy restrictions on the people who were there to inspect. They wouldn't allow them to go into certain places. And they lied about having a nuclear weapon. Shortly after Kennedy gets assassinated, LBJ comes into office, and he tries to do the same thing, but instead, rather than trying to have 2 inspections a year, LBJ settles for having biannual inspections. So as opposed to having 2 thorough inspections per year, or 1 every 6 months, which is what Kennedy wanted to do, LBJ decided, hey, I don't want to shake the boat. He didn't want to pick a fight with Israel because the people in the government, the people in his party at that time, were very pro-Israel. And so the director of the CIA in 1968 came to the conclusion that Israel had acquired nuclear weapons. And he told Lyndon B. Johnson that this was the case. And Lyndon B. Johnson said, don't let the Secretary of the Department of Defense and don't let the Secretary of the State Department know about this, because this could spill out and create a bigger problem in the government. And so he swept it under the rug. He hid it. And we basically just allowed Israel to get away with it. So they were running clandestine nuclear weapon operations, development operations, and programs while the CIA knew about it, and they knew that our foreign policy was completely against that, but they went ahead and did that anyways. And this was before anybody else in the Middle East had a nuclear weapon. Iraq didn't have a nuclear weapon. Iran didn't have a nuclear weapon. Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, none of those other countries had nuclear weapons at this time. They were the only ones who were trying to get one. And this created a lot of instability in the Middle East, and we're still dealing with the repercussions of that to this day. And so you can go ahead and fast forward a couple years. You have 1981, this is during the Reagan administration, Israel bombs Iraq's nuclear sites. They invade Lebanon. They continue to expand settlements in the West Bank. They annex the Golan Heights. And they scold the United States for selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. And they do all these things despite Reagan specifically telling them not to. This went completely against our foreign policy, directly against our foreign policy. Like it was a flagrant violation of our foreign policy for them to do any of those things. And for whatever reasons I'm not privy to, we still maintained a strong relationship with them. Actually, the relationship got stronger because a few years later, we allowed Israel access to our reconnaissance satellite equipment, which basically is just a fancy way of saying we allowed Israel access to our satellite images that gave live access, live imagery, real-time access to the positions, to the supplies, to the strength of a opposing military. We would use satellite imagery to scout the position and the strength of whatever military we might be fighting. They did this in the Gulf War in 1991. We allowed Israel to have access to the KH-11 satellite, which up until that point, the only other country that had access to it and very limited access was Britain, who was probably our second or third greatest ally at that point. So this is how close the relationship the United States had with Israel got. We allowed them to have access to those images, to that equipment. Satellite imaging, real-time satellite imaging, created by the United States of America. We allowed Israel to have access to that, to use it for their own military operations. Not to mention, the United States and Israel, since the 1980s, have signed some 24 intelligence sharing agreements. So this was something that was very useful during the Cold War, when Israel had to gain information on Afghanistan and the Soviet invasion on Afghanistan, and they would trade that information with the CIA for information that might benefit them about the countries in their region that we were privy to. So you understand, we have a very close relationship with this country. Our intelligence agencies, our most secretive intelligence agencies, are very close to each other. Do you understand? They know a lot about the United States of America and its own operations and the information that it has access to on its own citizens. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see what I'm relaying to you here? You understand? And it only gets worse from that point forward. Leading us to today, it only gets worse from that point forward. We give Israel so many benefits. We've given them so many passes on so many different things. Invading Lebanon, bombing Iraq's nuclear sites, expanding settlements in the West Bank, annexing the Golan Heights. We allow them to get away with all that, not letting us inspect their nuclear program, continuing to expand their nuclear arsenal. All of this was a direct violation of the United States foreign policy for several decades. And the fact that they didn't obey, the fact that they did not comply with our demands, is the reason why the United States has been involved in so many wars in the Middle East today, and why there's so many problems in the Middle East today. A lot of it has to do with Israel. They are the, I don't want to say core problem here, but they are a large, huge factor in the entire region's instability. That is not something that can be argued against. That is not something that can be questioned. And even to this day, Israel still continues to pull our arms. They still continue to disrespect us. They still continue to go against our demands. But I can't really say I blame them, because we are complicit in that. We are complicit in allowing that. We have the opportunity to pull aid from them. to stop funding them, to stop supporting their country. But we didn't. We went along with it for reasons, like I said, that I'm still not privy to. It could have been ideological. Maybe there was some blackmail going on. But I'm not too sure. But even to this day, we give Israel a lot of benefits that we don't give any other country and that Israel doesn't give to us. And that's why when people use the argument that Israel is our greatest ally, I don't actually think that's true, because that implies some kind of mutually beneficial relationship. And the relationship that we have with Israel is not mutually beneficial at all. It's actually parasitic. They benefit and we get hurt. They benefit and we get fucked. That's the relationship. We are Israel's greatest benefactor. And they are a massive source of subterfuge for our own country's will. And you have to understand something very clearly. Everybody, if you care about America, if you care about this country, if you are a self-proclaimed patriot, you must understand something very obvious, very simple, very clear here. You need to get this through your head. Israel does not give a shit about America. They don't give a shit about our well-being. They don't care about our soldiers. They don't care if our soldiers die in Iraq. They don't care if they die in Afghanistan. They're going to come to our country. They're going to demand more weapons. They're going to demand that we support them in whatever military endeavor or operation they feel like getting themselves involved with. Okay, they're going to demand that they have financial leeway. They're going to demand that they have oil guarantees, loan guarantees, that we expedite weapons shipping to them through our defense contractors, that they can bypass any red tape and any regulations we have on foreign military weapon sales. They're going to come to the United States, go to Washington, make demands, push around our politicians, talk to them like punks, and then when we try to put our foot down, they're going to say that we're abandoning them. They're going to be histrionic and hysterical. They're going to denigrate us. They're going to disrespect us. And Netanyahu has done this on multiple occasions. And that's what really bothers me about him. The arrogance, the disrespect, the lack of propriety. It is inexcusable to me, witnessing it. How when Biden decides to slow down weapon sales to Netanyahu, he wants to go on state television and talk about how we're sabotaging them, even after all the billions of dollars in aid that we've given to them, when they haven't given us shit in return. They just take and take and take and take and take. Let me tell you guys something, so you don't think I'm just waffling here. You want to know how I know Israel doesn't benefit the United States? You know, people talk about how there's some kind of like mutual research and development operation going on between the United States and Israel. Understand something very clearly. The Arrow missile defense system, the Iron Dome, the Merkava tank, the Lavi aircraft, all of that was funded with United States taxpayer money. We built their entire defensive arsenal. We funded their entire defensive arsenal. And we've been doing this since the 80s. Or since the 70s. We've been giving them billions of dollars in aid, millions of dollars in aid every single year to fund their own defense industry. We don't use any of their stuff. They use our stuff. The F-15, the F-16, the F-35, they use all that. They buy that from us, from America. We invented all that stuff. Israel was the first country we allowed to buy the F-35 jet. The first country ever. No other country has ever been allowed to buy that before Israel. We don't use their jets. They use our jets. We don't use their tanks. They use our tanks and the tanks that we helped them create. We created their Arrow missile defense system. We helped create their Iron Dome. We helped create the Lavi aircraft. What have they helped us create? What have they created that we use? We don't use their stuff. We use the M1 Abram tank. We don't use any Israeli tanks. We use the F-15 and the F-16 and the F-35. We don't use their jets. We use our own jets. We don't use their missile defense system. We use THAAD and Patriot. We funded their missile defense system. All the shit that they have came from our money. We built that country. We built their defense industry. They did not build ours. This is not like some kind of give and take relationship. We built their shit. And we use our own stuff. Want to know something else? The United States, since 2006, has annually been creating a sliver of money, a fund, a pool of money that we spend annually to pre-position our own weapons in Israel in case a regional war breaks out. What does pre-position mean? It simply means that we put our weapons there proactively so that in case of a military outbreak, in case there's a total war between Syria and Lebanon and Iraq and Israel and Iran and Saudi Arabia, and it's an all-out war, and we need to go ahead and deploy our troops in Israel, there will already be a stockpile of weapons set aside so that the moment we get there, we can just go to whatever facility it's being stored in Israel, and American soldiers can just go ahead and grab that stuff and get right into the fight. We don't have to wait. We don't have to go through a whole logistics issue. We don't have to send weapons from America through the defense contractors, through the DSCA and all these kinds of red tape regulations where it's got to get approved by Congress and send the weapons over there. It'll just be over there waiting for us. We've been doing this since the Bush administration. We told Israel, hey, we want to put our pre-designated weapons here that are pre-designated to specific military units in the United States military that we can just go over there and access with ease. And guess what Israel told us? After everything we've given them, after all the help we've given them, after all the support, the political support, the financial support, the military support, the oil guarantees, after all that for several decades, guess what they told us? They said you can only put your weapons here on the condition that we can use it in case of an emergency. The audacity, the disrespect, the audacity. After everything we've given them. Somebody needs to put this to a stop because it's ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous that this is okay to anybody. And guess what? During the 2006 Lebanon War, which was also against United States foreign policy, during the 2006 Lebanon War, Israel used our stockpiles to fight against Hezbollah. And they lost. They didn't even win the war. They lost the war. So they used our stuff, went against our foreign policy position, and lost the war anyways. And what good has come from that? Do you know what that means? That could mean in case a potential regional outbreak were to occur, if we were to deploy troops there, we wouldn't have any weapons. There would be no weapons there for us to use because we don't use Israel's weapons. So if we were to go there, we would have to go through this whole process of getting a whole bunch of stuff shipped across the Atlantic Ocean, over Africa, into Israel, which could significantly delay our military operations, could put us on the back foot. Because we were to go over there and the IDF, without our knowledge, used all our shit. That would be a huge strategic misstep, a huge strategic failure for the United States military. So understand that. Also, after 2001, after the 9/11 attacks, or I don't know if it was after or before, but in 2001, in coordination with the Bush administration, we agreed to have annual interagency meetings with the government of Israel, with the Ministry of Defense. It was going to be the Pentagon and the Ministry of Defense having annual interagency meetings together to talk about long-term goals and long-term strategies. We subsequently canceled those meetings and only restored them a couple years later in 2005 because we found out that Israel was sending military equipment from America to China, our number one competitor. And to this day, they're still disrespecting us. They still don't listen to us. When we ask them to make peace, they reject the peace plans. When we say, hey, stop killing innocent women and children in Gaza, they continue to do it anyways. When we say, hey, don't go ahead and do a military, don't go ahead and restart another military operation in Gaza, in Gaza City or in Rafah or in Han Yunis, they say, fuck you, we're going to do it anyways because we're Israel and you're our bitch. And we can do whatever we want. That's what they say. They don't say, yeah, we'll cooperate, we'll work with you, we'll negotiate with Hamas, we'll sign a ceasefire. They say, fuck you, fuck your ceasefire, fuck your foreign policy. We care about Israel only. We're Israel first. We don't care about America after the billions of dollars of support and aid. They think they own us. They think they can do whatever they want with our stuff, with our money, with our weapons. They use our weapons that it's not supposed to be used for those reasons. They're not supposed to be using our stockpile that is supposed to be for United States units in case of an emergency. They're not supposed to be using that stuff for their own military operations. But they go ahead and do it anyways, even though that is not what that stuff is supposed to be used for. They use our weapons when they're not supposed to. Not to mention, much of the aid that we give to Israel, they use to buy United States Treasury bills, which adds to the United States interest that we have to pay off. Taxpayers have to pay higher levels of interest because Israel wants to buy United States Treasury bills. Don't you think they might be able to use that money to help, I don't know, fund our defense industry or give us an oil guarantee? We have a strategic oil supply, a supplementary reserve of oil set aside for Israel in case they have an oil disaster or they deplete their reserves or something or run out of oil. We have oil set aside for them to resuscitate their economy. Do you think they have an oil reserve just sitting around somewhere in Tel Aviv or Haifa or in the Negev in case the United States needs it? Absolutely not. Of course they don't, because they don't care about us. They only care about us insofar as they can take advantage of our money and our military. That's it. So when Netanyahu goes up to Congress, he's like, the United States military is our greatest ally. We love you guys. You really think he means that? You think that's from the heart? No, it's not. It's not from the heart. He goes up there, he does these formalities, he talks about how we're the greatest ally and a beacon of democracy in the Middle East and yada yada. Meanwhile, they are violating all of the State Department's recommendations because they don't care. You think if they really cared about us that maybe they would be willing to cooperate, willing to listen? But of course not, because they care about their own regional hegemony at any cost, at the cost of the United States of America, at the cost of our tax dollars. Israel does not, you guys need to understand something very clearly as Americans. Israel does not care about you as an American. They don't care about me. They don't care if I get deployed in Iran or Iraq and I die and my family has trauma and thousands of other Americans' families have trauma and they end up committing suicide because our VA system sucks. Israel doesn't care about that. They care about their own strategic objectives at the expense of everybody else. You need to understand that very clearly. This is a very selfish group of people, a very disrespectful country, a very disrespectful group of people, a very selfish group of people. Understand that clearly. You need to be able to see these things very clearly. The Zionist project, the Zionist fight, does not serve the foreign policy interests of the United States. What would serve the foreign policy interests of the United States actually would be to play Israel and Iran and Saudi Arabia off of each other so that none of them ever have hegemony over all the resources in the entire region, and they have to constantly vie for the United States support, the United States aid, and keep giving us benefits, keep in contact with us. That is really what would be the best foreign policy path for the United States moving forward. But Israel thinks that we're just supposed to help them establish hegemony. And then what? They sell more of our stuff to China? I mean, right now, as we speak, Israel is conducting a Belt and Road initiative with China to build a trade route through Africa, through the Middle East, through Europe, and through Asia, so that they conduct easy and efficient trade throughout that entire region. And Israel is going to be the fulcrum. They're going to be at the epicenter of that route. All those goods, all that trade, all of it is going to go through Israel. And if they ever wanted to cut it off because they have problems with the country who was using that route, they would be able to constrict it and restrict the flow of aid. It would give them a lot of power. Understand that. And this would hurt the United States' foreign policy objectives because, as you guys already know, we have beef with China. So understand something clearly. Israel doesn't care about us. They do all these illegal Mossad operations. They dress up as Americans and conduct intelligence operations as Americans to do false flags, to get us brought into regional wars with Pakistan and Iran. And that right there pretty much just goes ahead and shows you that they have no regard for our safety, for our security. So if you're a Zionist, if you still support Israel, honestly, you should just be deported. Or have your citizenship revoked, or go move to Israel or something, because you are not for this country's interests. You are not for this country's foreign policy, what would be in our own best interest. You are pro restricting free speech if you are a Zionist in this country. So understand, I have no love or regard for Israel as an American, as a patriot, as a nationalist. And if you are, you should have no respect or regard for them either. I mean, and just to reiterate here, so you guys don't forget, in the 1960s, they wouldn't let us inspect their nuclear sites. They wouldn't sign a non-proliferation treaty. They bombed Iraq's nuclear sites. They bombed the USS Liberty. They annexed the Golan Heights. They expanded settlements into the West Bank. They use our stockpiles for weapons that are designated for United States military units for their own illegal military operations. They send our technology and our military equipment to our greatest competitor, and then they come to our country and demand shit from us. So, I don't know. That to me doesn't seem like a really good ally. That doesn't seem like somebody that I would want to have a close relationship with. That seems like someone who would probably try to snake me for their own vested interests and their own self-preserving inclinations. And I'm just calling a spade a spade. I'm just calling it how I see it. I'm not coming up here to push a conspiracy. It's all there. You can look at all of this yourself if you don't believe me. You can investigate any claim I've made in the past hour and scrutinize it and come to the conclusions on your own. But I have the receipts, I have the information, I have the data. So the narrative is really on my side. The evidence is really on my side here. It's up to you whether or not you want to take it. But that's that. And just to take a little bit of a leap here, you guys have to understand all that is a segue to what I'm going to start talking about now, because this is really what's important. And this is really what everybody needs to keep in mind if you care about the country. So right now, Palantir, which is a surveillance software company that has contracts with the CIA, that has contracts with the FBI, that has contracts with the NSA and the Department of Homeland Security, millions of dollars of contracts with the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, billions of dollars of contracts if you add it all together. This company now is trying to put all of the IRS, all of the federal payment information, all of the human health services information, Medicare, Medicaid, your health records, they want to put all that information on one software platform called Foundry, which is Palantir's own patented software platform, where they can put all of this database on one platform so that they can cross-reference it and build a profile or a dossier on every single American who is in the database. They're going to have your health records. They're going to have your student loan debt records. They're going to have your tax information. They're going to know who you're related to. They're going to have access to your Social Security information and your Social Security funds. They're going to have access to your criminal records, your public records, every parking ticket you ever got, every red light you've ever run, every fire hydrant you've ever parked next to. All of that information is going to be put on one database, and Palantir is going to have the opportunity to pull from all that information and create a profile on you to measure how much of a potential threat you might be to the political establishment. Think about that. And to make matters worse, Lavender, which is the facial recognition, the biometric software that Palantir uses and has given to Israel to identify insurgents in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, to determine how much of a risk they might be, whether they're a 100% risk of being a terrorist, 90% risk of being a terrorist, 80% risk of being a terrorist. They're using that Lavender software to punch that person, plug that person into based on transactions, based on the people they're related to, based on the way they walk, based on who they hang out with, based on what they do on a daily basis. They're going to analyze all that information, punch it into a computer algorithm, and spit out a number on how likely it is that that person might be a terrorist. Whether it's 80%, 90%, 70%, they're using a computer algorithm to determine how much of a threat a person might be. And you have no way of seeing or accessing any of this information. It's literally just like the movies. Think about it like it's the movies. Everybody has seen those movies where, you got people in some facility that is closed off and only a couple people have access to, and you got to punch in a PIN number to get into this steel shut door, this underground cave, and you walk in and there's this big electronic whiteboard in front of you, and you got this guy or this woman behind a podium with a keyboard, and they got to type in a search index, and you got this other guy standing by the whiteboard, and he's dragging his finger across the screen like it's Star Trek or something, dragging his finger across the screen and matching you to a particular thread or a particular location or a particular region, or matching all this information, punching all these buttons in and spitting out a calculation. That's literally what's going to happen in the coming years, sooner than later. And what scares me the most about this is that Peter Thiel, the same guy who owns Palantir, they own the Foundry software, they own Lavender, which is like I said, it's a facial recognition biometric software program that is associated with Palantir, that I'm sure uses much of the same software. Lavender is being used in Israel for their own military operations. Lavender is tied through software and through the owners of the company to Palantir. And Palantir is also associated with, or not associated with, but the creators of Foundry, which the United States is going to start using to put all your information on one master database that can be accessed through a search index or through a directory. So you have Israel using Lavender, you have the United States using Foundry. Palantir owns both of these programs, and they're all being brought in. They're all tied to Palantir. That doesn't concern anybody. That doesn't concern anyone. Does that not sound like a surveillance state to you? Because if you actually understand how Palantir got its start, all of this becomes 1,000 times worse. Palantir was funded by In-Q-Tel. In-Q-Tel is the venture capital arm of the CIA. So In-Q-Tel has a pool of money pumped into it by the CIA to fund or to buy products or services from independent businesses from Silicon Valley or wherever else, to buy their products and buy their services to improve the operations and to improve the surveillance capacity of the CIA. So the CIA used In-Q-Tel, their venture capital arm, to pump millions of dollars or billions of dollars into Palantir to spy on American citizens. And the reason why the CIA pumped all that money into Palantir is because they wanted to exercise, to conduct a program called TIA. TIA stands for Total Information Awareness. Total Information Awareness was a program from the CIA, and the entire goal of it was to have access to every transaction, to every bank statement, to every receipt, to your education, to your address, to your contacts, to your social media activity, to your license and registration and your insurance information, to determine how likely it was that you might be a terrorist. That is what the CIA wanted to do after 9/11. And because they couldn't do it, because it was a violation of the Fourth Amendment, they pumped a whole bunch of money through their venture capital arm into Palantir to go ahead and do that on their own, because they're a part of the private sector. They are not constrained in the same ways to the Constitution of the United States that the CIA is, because the CIA is a part of the government. Even though we all know the CIA doesn't care about the Constitution anyways, let's just be real here. But that's what Palantir is. So understand very well here. Understand this. Palantir is a surveillance spying software. That is what Palantir is. That is what their company does. That is what they specialize in. For several years, for the first 7 years, from 2001 to 2008, the only customer they had was the CIA. And now, of course, Palantir has an office in Tel Aviv, which is in Israel. And they're doing business transactions, and they're signing contracts, and they're hiring employees, and they have people who work for the Israeli government and the IDF in the company. So we're literally bringing a company who has ties to a foreign military, foreign intelligence, foreign country, and we're using Palantir, and we're bringing all of Israel's different elements, the government, the military, all that stuff. It's all going to be put on the same platform, or it's all going to be done through the same company that the United States government is going to be on. That is absurd. That is insane. And you don't think, with how sophisticated the spies of the Mossad are, with the fact that they have Cyanim in the United States, which are basically just, if you don't know what Cyanim are, Cyanim, Sayanim, go look it up yourself, Sayanim. What the Cyanim are basically Mossad operates who front as normal civilians in the Jewish diaspora. So what they basically do is they front as dentists, as business owners, as financial analysts, as politicians, potentially donors, owners of NGOs, owners of think tanks, and they're on standby. And the moment they get a call or a request from Mossad to send them classified information or to, help them with a particular operation, they will activate the Sionim to go ahead and do that. So there are people who front as civilians in the Jewish diaspora who wait for a call from Mossad to assist them in conducting a espionage operation. We have those people in the United States. And now you're meaning to tell me that a company that has ties to that country and their intelligence agency, they're going to put our country's federal payment system, our treasury, our health records, our education records, our voting records, our vaccination records, our debt, our tax information onto one platform, knowing that this company has ties to a country that has spies anywhere and all across the world. Does that make sense to anybody? Does that really sound wise? Does that really sound pro-America? The answer to that question should be obvious. And anybody who knows about the Patriot Act and all the stuff that happened after the Patriot Act, and with Edward Snowden and the United States government spying on you and knowing where you are at all times by tracking your phone, and TSA, and all the stuff with passports and all the IDs, and now they want to push through electronic IDs. And now you have this technology surveillance software company trying to put two different governments to use their software onto one database. I mean, obviously Israel is going to have their own database. The United States government's going to have their own database, but they're using the same. It's being done through the same company. And this isn't raising anybody's suspicions. This isn't odd to anybody. I mean, what are we talking about? This is what I'm talking about. Our country is being infiltrated by people who have no loyalty to the country. And it's absurd. You have Palantir spying on us, coordinating with two governments, with two different foreign intelligence agencies, with two different intelligence agencies. You have the fact that there's people being forced to step down from college campuses from saying anti-Semitic things. You have random anonymous websites doxing and blacklisting and expelling and suspending and arresting and detaining American citizens for saying things that could be construed as anti-Semitic. Professors being doxed and blacklisted, making it harder for them to get jobs in the future. This is a complete government takeover. This is infiltration. This is espionage. This is an infiltration of the American government to weaponize it against its own citizens. That is what's happening. That is literally what's happening. This is not a conspiracy. Look at all the money. Look at who's running stuff. Look at the laws. Look at what's happening. It's obvious. You guys need to wake up. You guys need to get privy to this. Because if you don't, 5 or 10 years from now, we could be living in a country where violations of the First Amendment just become commonplace. And the left had been doing it with censorship, but not to this degree. This is unprecedented with the technology and the spying. So all I'm saying is you guys got to get privy to this. You guys need to wake up. Don't vote for people who have ties and affiliations to Silicon Valley and Palantir if you think that this is unjust. Because otherwise, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. And it's the same thing with guys like J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is funded by Palantir. J.D. Vance is now the vice president of the United States. And he's funded by Palantir, by Peter Thiel. He funded his venture capital. He funded his Senate campaign in 2022 and helped him win the election. No, that much money has never been pumped into a Senate campaign, a Senate race ever in United States history. And of course, this guy is a hardcore, I'm talking about J.D. Vance here, a hardcore Zionist. So all I'm saying is, look, wake up, get privy, understand what's happening in the country, and don't vote for anybody who is allowing this to transpire, because it's a major violation, a major step on all of our civil liberties. Understand that very clearly, please, okay? With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. We're about an hour and 16 minutes in here, but that's all I have to say. And look, I want to give credit to Nick Fuentes, because Nick Fuentes, I do believe that he cares about the well-being, the sanctity, the sovereignty of our country. He has said it himself. He doesn't necessarily care if it's a liberal or a conservative or a Republican or a Democrat or whatever who is calling the shots in this country. He just wants them to be a patriot. He wants them to be America first. And I agree with him. I want that too. Our politicians should not be servants, should not be stooges for billionaires, for Zionists, or for Israel or any other foreign government for that fact. That is something that everybody in this country should be able to agree on. That should not be controversial. So yes, thank you. Shout out to Nick Fuentes. You know, I took a lot of inspiration for this particular video from you, and I want to give you credit because you deserve it. But that's all I have to say, guys. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, I'm going to be doing this, if not every day, every other day. So if you like the video, like, subscribe, share the video, please, and understand everything I've told you and take it with you and make good use of it. I appreciate you guys. And with that being said, I'm out.